Hello. I want to begin today, before we turn back to Electra, by saying some things about thesis statements to help you in preparation for your upcoming essay. I sent around with the email a document on thesis statements, and I'm simply going to go over that to reinforce it. You compose a thesis statement after you have decided clearly what your topic will be and written an outline. And I cannot tell you how to compose an outline because that is an entirely subjective thing that reflects your own sense of organization. But I trust that you have your own method in doing it. Now, every formal analytic essay, no matter what the length, requires a thesis. Unfortunately, this sentence is often the most difficult part of the essay to write. It need not, by the way, be a single sentence. It can be two sentences if you prefer. You may find that you need to rewrite this thesis several times before embarking on the rest of your paper, but once you have got it, it is a foundation that you can build on, and that's what it's intended to be. Well, what is a thesis statement? Put simply, it is a one or two sentence opening to the paper that states in clear, direct language what your central unifying idea is. That idea is your thesis. Now, an effective thesis statement is broad enough to communicate the scope and aims of your paper, of whatever length, but it is also precise enough to anticipate a particular line of argument or interpretation which will immediately follow. So you need then to balance both general and specific information in a thesis, and this is one reason why it is often very tricky to write. What should a thesis statement contain? Well, it should always mention the author and the work or works that you're analyzing, and it should also present the paper's central governing idea. Present it directly and present it immediately, okay? As such, the thesis statement should serve as a springboard for the analytic sentences and paragraphs that follow. Now, here are some practices to avoid in writing thesis statements. Number one, do not set the thesis statement off as a paragraph, separate from the rest of the essay as if it were some sort of magical entity, some unrelated pronouncement. It's not. It's the beginning of the opening paragraph. Okay? Second, do not delay your thesis statement until the end of the opening paragraph. The thesis should come at the very start of the paper. Get to the point immediately. Now, I realize that this may go against what you have been taught earlier, but so be it, because I simply ask this question, particularly in a short paper like 5 to 6 pages. If you put the thesis at the end of the first paragraph, what in the hell is going to precede it? I mean, what is the purpose of that? Clearing your throat? No. You don't want to waste any space here. Don't think of this as 5 pages you have to fill like a hole in the ground with dirt. No. Think of it as the trunk of a compact car into which you are trying with the greatest care and assiduity to organize and place everything that you want, everything you want to say in this case. Okay. Number 3, do not announce your thesis by calling attention to the fact that you are writing an essay, as in this paper I plan to discuss the twofold role of the chorus in Sophocles' Electra. No. We know that you are writing the paper, so leave out all references to you or what you intend to say. Just say it. No need for an announcement. Number 4, do not write openings that waste the reader's time with non-essential background information, as in, although historical references indicate that Sophocles wrote over 100 plays, only 7 of them survive today. Now, that information may be interesting, but it is undoubtedly irrelevant to the specific focus of your analysis on Electra, okay? This is an analysis. You don't need background information at the start. 5, do not write thesis statements that are so vague, generalized, or merely factual that they fail to suggest the specific direction of your interpretation, okay? Remember, this is supposed to articulate your central governing idea. For example, avoid things like this. Euripides' tragedy Medea is about a woman who kills her own children. Okay? That's a statement of fact. It's not an idea. It's not an act of interpretation. Or Euripides' tragedy Medea calls forth the audience's emotions. Well, that's true of any play, certainly any tragedy. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't articulate an idea. at all. Okay? There's certainly no clear interpretive impetus in those statements. Number 6 in the things to avoid. Do not attempt to compress everything you intend to say in the paper into the thesis statement. Sometimes one's overzealousness to make the thesis rich can lead to this particular problem. Remember, the thesis introduces your primary idea and sets the interpretation in motion, but it's not meant to be a mini essay in itself. Nor should you summarize your entire argument, for that matter, in the first paragraph of the essay. That leads to needless repetition later in the paper because inevitably you will have to say it again. Instead, after presenting your thesis, develop your ideas clearly and fully, one at a time. All right. And finally, do not write thesis statements that contain trite generalizations, pseudo-elegant profundities, or rhetorical questions that have no specific bearing on the work you're analyzing. Okay, when I got one of these, I thought, oh dear, what is going to follow? This is not promising. I wonder whether, in fact, they've done any thinking about this before they started. For example, if you were writing on Agamemnon, avoid openings like this. Family life is nearly always fraught with turmoil and trauma. Oh, no, please. Or if you were writing on Othello, there's a good reason why jealousy is known as the green-eyed monster. Stop. Or if you were writing on Medea, as human beings, haven't we all been bitterly disappointed in love? Oy vey. No. Okay. Well, now that I've given you 7 things to avoid, here is an example of an effective thesis statement, free of all those pitfalls, one that presents clearly a central governing idea. Suppose your chosen topic was a discussion of Electra in relation to Aristotle's theory of tragic plot. Okay, this would be a good thesis statement. Sophocles' Electra corresponds to Aristotle's conception of a reversal or change in fortune as essential to a tragic plot. However, Sophocles' tragedy is unusual in that this peripeteia, and Electra's recognition of it, involves a change not from happiness to misery, but rather from misery to happiness. Okay, that's clear enough, precise enough to build on. It gives a sense of the central governing idea, the scope of the essay, and yet it doesn't generalize unduly. Okay. Now, a thesis sentence of that kind articulates your central argument and establishes a preliminary platform upon which you can then develop your ideas. Finally, one last thing which I fear many of you will undoubtedly forget. Any analytic essay, no matter how short, requires an original title, okay? And the title ought to reflect the thesis. So don't, put at the top of your paper such titles as Essay Number 1 or Othello or Analysis of Medea. No, an original title. Okay, with that in mind now, we can turn our attention back to Electra. Now, we have thus far considered the first 4 scenes of Electra. The play's dramatic climax comes in scene number 5, with the moving recognition between Electra and Orestes. It does not, the climax, come in the retributive killing of Clytemnestra and Aegisthus that follow in the closing scene. Now, Aristotle, remember, theorizes that the plot of a tragedy turns on what he calls the peripeteia, that is, a reversal of the fortunes of the protagonist, almost always a reversal that comes in a sudden change, bringing them from good fortune to bad fortune. In Agamemnon, we saw this reversal occurred the moment he stepped onto the red tapestries at Clytemnestra's urging. That was his fall. Well, Electra's abrupt shift in fortunes occurs here in the scene with Orestes in the most extreme way. It is a change, however, very unlike what we usually get. It's a change from agony and helplessness at what she thought was the death of her brother to joy at discovering he's alive and gratification that he has finally returned to Mycenae to execute justice. So what's strange about this particular structural shift in the plot from an Aristotelian point of view is that the change in fortunes at this climactic moment is the reverse of what we almost always get in Greek drama. This is not a change from happiness to loss and pain for Electra. She's lived with loss and pain for many years, as we've seen, but rather it's a change from impotent suffering to ecstasy and relief and satisfaction. Now, we'll see that all three of the Greek tragedies that we're studying depart from Aristotle's model in important ways. This one will be no exception, and we've seen one there. Well, scene 5 of Electra opens with Orestes pretending to be the emissary from Delphi who is supposedly bringing his ashes back to the city of his birth. Electra has been in frequent communication with Orestes over the years, but she hasn't seen her brother since he was 3 years old. So neither he nor Electra recognize one another at first in what amounts to a kind of double dramatic irony, because the reader or viewer knows the true identity of both characters. Orestes, as a messenger, tells Electra, quote, "We're here to deliver this little urn. It holds the remains of his body." Consider Electra's response as she asks to hold the urn at this moment of deep sorrow. She says, "Good sir, I beg you, if this vessel really contains him, please let me hold it. I need to weep and wail for myself and my whole house as well as these ashes." She takes it from him. "Take it across and let her have it," Orestes says. "Whoever she is, she can't be an enemy. Some friend maybe, or one close to the family." Electra, taking the urns in her hand, looking at it, says, "You were a strong and lovely boy, but what are my arms enfolding now? Nothing, nothing." Now, that word nothing resonates here, and Electra will repeat it hereafter, because nothing sums up her entire situation at this moment. She has no father. She now believes she has no brother. She has no hope. She has no purpose for living, with the prospect of just retribution, the one thing that kept her alive, apparently now gone forever. All her hopes and efforts to bring Orestes back home to avenge their father's death seem to have been wasted. As Electra speaks to the urn that she's holding, as if speaking to the living Orestes, the ashes become a fit symbol of her own wasted life. And as she speaks to the urn in this way, one might say that, like those supposed ashes, she has been reduced to nothing. And now more than ever, she longs to be with those ashes. She longs for death, longs to be reduced to ashes herself. She expresses her sense of being reduced to nothing in the play's most moving lamentation as she continues to caress the urn. She says, "Your tiny weight has come home in a tiny urn. Oh, what a waste! The tender care I lavished upon you, my labor of love all gone for nothing. You were never your mother's child. You were mine. I was your only nurse. One of the servants and I was the one who always called you sister. Now your death has blotted my efforts out in a single day. Oh, how you have destroyed me. You've destroyed me, Orestes, my darling brother. So let me come now into this little house of yours. Nothingness into nothing." Well, death holds a twofold attraction for Electra at this moment. First, it's a way of escaping the misery and isolation of grieving for what she now believes are both her father and her brother. And it also attracts her as a way of being with them, as she puts it, in the earth, in this little house of yours, and then in the earth, the ashes to be buried. She would like to be reduced to ashes like those in the urn, which she calls Orestes' little house, and then be with them under the ground. The nothingness she feels in life is so great that she wants only to be reduced and resolved into the literal nothingness that is death. But at this moment of deepest sorrow, suddenly everything reverses itself, everything changes. First, Orestes realizes that the woman clutching the urn and speaking in so poignant a way can only be his sister. He's finally moved by the sound of her suffering, which you remember at the beginning of the play he was too preoccupied to attend to, even though the old servant heard it. But Orestes holds back from revealing himself to her at first. In fact, he holds back for an agonizingly long time. Instead, he maintains the pretense of being a messenger and asks Electra questions to which he already knows the answer. Questions such as this: does nobody come to your aid to try to prevent your suffering? He asks. To which Electra says, there was only one, and you've just shown me his ashes. Poor woman, Orestes says. And then Electra says, who are you? Surely not such kinsman of mine. Now, note that as Orestes continues to question her, as he continues to ask her, what could be worse to see than what I see now? To which Electra says that I have to make my home in the murderer's den. She fills in what he already knows is the situation there in Mycenae. So why does he delay and ask these questions rather than revealing himself? Well, it is not that he is questioning Electra because he isn't sure who she is and wants to verify that with her answers. No, he knows at this point that it is his sister. Rather, he delays with these questions because he fears that if the chorus of Mycenaean women who are standing there overhear what he is saying, they may inform on him and tell Clytemnestra that, in fact, he is still alive. Thus, he doesn't initially want the chorus to know. It's only when Electra assures him that the women are her friends, that they sympathize with her, and that he can trust him, only then does Orestes reveal himself. Orestes says, the living don't belong in a grave. Electra, my boy, what are you saying? Only the truth. Electra, he's alive? Orestes, yes, if I am alive. Electra, you are Orestes. Yes, he says, look at this ring with our royal father's seal. Do you believe me now? Electra says, the sun's come out. Yes, Orestes says, it's shining bright. Well, just as this moment of disclosure, as we've seen, marks the peripeteia, or reversal within the plot of Electra, so too it also marks another aspect of plot that Aristotle deems essential, as we have seen in tragedy, and that is what he calls recognition. Aristotle describes recognition as, quote, a change from ignorance to knowledge, okay? Like the peripeteia, it's a change, but in this case, a psychological change. And this change from ignorance to knowledge usually brings the tragic protagonist to a clear-eyed understanding of what terrible thing is happening to them and also why it's happening to them. Both the protagonist and the audience, at such moments of recognition, according to Aristotle, experience what he calls, quote, an emotional shock of surprise. Now, in this case, the surprise that we feel and Electra feels in the moment of recognition is joyful, and the recognition is quite literally. You are my brother. She recognizes that long-lost brother, and with this, she sees now the real possibility of retribution for her father's killing. She recognizes that that can now occur. Electra also now sees herself differently. She sees herself no longer as one who has simply wasted her life in mourning and waiting, but rather now she sees herself as one whose years of patience and suffering have borne this fruit. He's back. She also sees her future clearly now that Orestes has returned. She feels liberated and empowered by this recognition. Electra says, yes, each day that dawns and each hour will serve now to sing the crimes aloud. I've had to wait so long, and now my lips are free. God has brought you home, Orestes, and I can cry in triumph. This is a sign from heaven. Now, you'll note that the plays reversal and recognition come almost simultaneously here in scene 5. But once again, this is uncharacteristic, this recognition, because the change in fortune is for the better, and the recognition, the knowledge acquired, is now a source not of pain and anguish, as is usually the case with recognition, but is rather a source of joy. The tragic part of Electra's life comes, if you will, in the first 4 scenes of the play. But this unusual approach to Aristotle's conception of structure poses a question. Is there tragedy at the end of this play? As it would seem in some sense there must always be tragedy at the end of a play to make it a tragedy. Well, we'll see shortly, but keep that question in mind. Electra is so overwhelmed with happiness at Orestes' return that he has to actually shut her up and return to his preoccupation with deception and careful timing. Within this, he decides that he will assign Electra a role which she is all too happy to fulfill. Enough of words, he says, Electra. No. Now, you don't need to explain how vile our mother is. I know that already. Talking could make us miss the crucial moment. Here is the question that needs an answer to. Now, where should we show our presence or wait in ambush if our mission's going to wipe the smile off their faces? When the two of us are going inside, our mother mustn't suspect what's going on. Treat the false report of my death when you go in as if it were true. Electra's role, then, is to go inside the palace and pretend to be mourning Orestes, so that Clytemnestra sees her mourning and feels all the more confident, indeed, that her son is dead. Clytemnestra, they believe, will easily mistake Electra's tears of joy for tears of sorrow. Now, Orestes knows that when he goes into the palace himself, Clytemnestra will not recognize him as her son. After all, she hasn't seen him since he was 3, and she assumes now that he is dead anyway. So everything has been carefully planned, and the old slave reinforces the need to act at a precise moment. You remember at the start of the play he said they'd come to a final crossroads? Well, the moment when they have to walk down one of those paths now, when they have to, when Orestes has to literally cross into the palace, that moment has come, and they must not, the old servant says, risk that key opportunity by wasting time. Thus he says, now stop this endless talking and these cries of insatiable joy, Electra. The moment's come to be shot of your task. Okay, this is their shot. Well, Electra appeals to 2 gods hereafter for support in this retribution. And ironically, they're the same 2 gods that Clytemnestra had prayed to earlier. Electra first asks Artemis for strength, and this appeal to the virgin goddess from the virginal Electra is certainly more appropriate than Clytemnestra's prayer to Artemis had been, the adulterous Clytemnestra. Also, Electra, like her mother, prays to Apollo to aid them, as she puts it, to show all mankind what recompense the gods bestow on sinful wickedness. Now, this prayer from Electra makes sense because Apollo, after all, told Orestes to use deception in pursuing revenge, and Electra's own counterfeit sorrow in the palace is in fact now a part of that plan of deception. Thus it seems that Othello, while he hasn't ordered this, certainly has sanctioned the killing. She prays to him. Electra knows that Orestes is about to kill their mother, but you'll note here that even now she holds back from using the words murder or killing or bloodshed in her prayers to these gods, just as she has refused to use those words before. She still resorts to euphemisms at this point, euphemisms like this enterprise and recompense. Why? Well, this is probably due to the same instinctive moral aversion on her part to matricide that has kept Electra from envisioning the killing of Clytemnestra as a form of revenge, even when she was urging her sister to help her butcher Aegisthus. Nor will Electra participate in or even witness the stabbing of Clytemnestra to death. Now, Orestes does that entirely on his own in Sophocles' version of the story, unlike the version of Electra in Euripides. Here, Electra merely hears the death cries of her mother, along with the audience, when in fact the killing, of course, is taking place off stage. The chorus, at this point, is entirely on the side of Electra and Orestes in pursuing vengeance, and they liken Orestes to the god of deception, Hermes, as they imagine him moving through the palace, quote, with wily tread, preparing to, quote, ambush his wicked mother, stalking her, and her not knowing who he is. Okay, this brings us to the closing scene of Electra, which is shocking not just because it features Orestes slaughtering his mother and preparing to slaughter Aegisthus. But it's even more shocking because of Electra's disturbing and unexpected response to these killings, the first of which she does not even see. Nevertheless, Electra, listening to it as she stands on stage, reacts with bloodthirsty delight as she hears her mother being slaughtered inside the palace. She stands outside listening to it and also watching to see if Aegisthus returns so that she can alert her brother inside. Consider how this unfolds. Clytemnestra says, my house is empty of friends and all possessed now of destroyers. Electra outside, listen, a cry indoors. Did you hear it, my friends? The chorus says, I heard a sound cruel to hear and felt a trembling coldness. Oh, Clytemnestra says, Aegisthus, where are you? Electra then says, I hear another cry there. Clytemnestra again inside, my son, have mercy on your mother, as he stabs her. And outside Electra says, you had no mercy on him, nor on his father before him. And then again, Clytemnestra in her death throes, I'm struck. And Electra's response, strike her a second blow, Orestes, if you have the strength. And finally, the last gasp, Clytemnestra, oh my, again. To which Electra responds, I wish Aegisthus were lying beside you. Whew! Now, this is unexpected. Note here that part of Clytemnestra's punishment is that Orestes is clearly revealing himself to her as his son as he is killing her, forcing Clytemnestra to see how she has been tricked. Just, you'll recall, as Aeschylus's Clytemnestra forced Agamemnon to see how she had tricked him while she was stabbing him in the bathtub. It seems like appropriate payback. Meanwhile, though, while this bloodbath is going on, Electra, on stage, listening to it and waiting eagerly outside for these sounds, when she hears her mother's agony and hears her mother beg for mercy, remains not just unmoved, but sanguine, bloodthirsty. She shouts, you had no mercy on my father. She's no longer morally conflicted now about the death of her mother. She now revels in that murder, envisions how it is happening, which she couldn't bring herself to do before. Clearly she does now, and she celebrates the sounds of Clytemnestra's pain and terror and anguish. Strike her a second blow, she cries, even though this is, after all, the shedding of kindred blood, the violation of a deep cultural taboo that she had warned her mother against and said, you violated that in killing my father. She's doing it herself now, or at least supporting it now, urging it on. Earlier, recall, she had condemned Clytemnestra's justifications for killing Agamemnon because it was blood for blood. No longer does that seem in any way to be a moral impediment for her, even though, after all, it is a taboo. Heretofore, remember, despite her hatred of Clytemnestra, Electra's fear of that blood for blood sanction and her moral scruples about violating it had prevented her from envisioning or describing murder at all as the appropriate retribution for her mother's crimes. But now that the murder is occurring, those scruples disappear entirely. They disappear, it seems, as soon as Orestes enters the palace with his dagger. And the psychological change in Electra here is almost as sudden as the change of her fortunes in scene 5. Now, it is also shocking, I think, to readers and viewers that the chorus here, which has heretofore warned Electra against losing emotional control, now go far beyond merely supporting the killing as an act of justice. Now, these women, as if they have picked up a kind of psychic virus from Electra, share her delight in this eye for an eye bloodletting. And this marks a change in them. The chorus's regard for the killing as part of the curse of the house of Atreus that Agamemnon's father occurred, and that is now continuing, leads them to regard this as somehow inevitable. It began with Atreus slaughtering the children of Thyestes. It continued with the killing of Agamemnon, and now they regard this as an inevitable and necessary extension of that blood curse. The curse of the now dead Thyestes pronounced against Atreus and his descendants has now come to manifest itself again in the killing of Agamemnon's killer. It's interesting that the chorus regards these events, as I've suggested, dictated by destiny, whereas at this point, Orestes and Electra speak of these killings as deliberate acts of free will, and they take credit for them. In the past, both have at times tried to retreat into the idea that they aren't free agents. Now, they know and insist that they are. But neither the chorus, nor Electra, nor Orestes, in the course of this killing, exhibit the slightest guilt or remorse or moral revulsion over Clytemnestra's demise. Perhaps that's because in Sophocles' version, Clytemnestra, unlike Aeschylus's Clytemnestra, has not a shred of dignity or nobility about her. Well, when Orestes comes out of the palace, Electra merely asks him, "Is that vile woman dead?" Her behavior in this closing scene, I think, raises two difficult questions. First, how do we explain the drastic transformation in Electra from a woman who is morally conflicted, both about her own self-destructive grief and about the prospect of killing her mother? How are we to react to the transformation from that woman into one who now celebrates the murder in a kind of violent delirium? Strike her a second blow. It would seem that Electra has repressed that violent aggression in herself for so many years that it has built up and now breaks loose in this moment as Orestes stabs his mother to death. That the very ferocity and suddenness of this response on her part has something to do with how long she has held it in check and refused even to consider it. The second, more challenging question, I think, is this. How does Sophocles want us to react to Electra's passionate bloodlust, this delirium of frenzied aggression? Well, her responses border on the barbaric and at times even on the sadistic. She enjoys the sound of her mother's agony and fear, and she mocks Clytemnestra when the woman begs for mercy. And after Orestes has dispatched Clytemnestra, Electra wants more blood. She immediately says, "The first round is won. Make sure of the second," that is, Aegisthus. In other words, be sure to slaughter him too when he gets back, and be sure to make him suffer. Well, how does the reader or viewer who has sympathized with Electra's long suffering, who has admired her moral scruples and self-awareness, and who has shared in her joy at Orestes' return, how do we now respond to this? How should we respond? Well, part of the fascination of this play is that Sophocles doesn't make it clear how we could respond. And if you think about it, how could he ever make that determinative? Drama is, after all, the most impersonal of literary forms. There is no place in a play for the author directly to comment on or tell us what to do or how to think through a narrator, because there is no narrator the way there is in a novel. A novelist, through a reliable narrator, can form judgments about characters for the reader. Not so in the impersonal form of drama. But we do know that Sophocles is writing a tragedy. So, according to Aristotle, there has to be then something at the end of this play to create or sustain our pity and fear for Electra, rather than simply feeling moral satisfaction at watching evildoers killed. There has to be some sense of tragedy with regard to our sense of her. What could that tragedy be? Well, I think the tragedy lies in Electra's moral perversion, her change from a woman of conscience to one who relishes the suffering of her enemies in ways that go beyond retributive justice. We have pitied Electra all along, but her behavior in the closing scene fills us with fear. Now, in Aristotle's terms, because we've identified with her, we now sense fearfully that we too could, like her, lose our moral compass and descend into a kind of barbarism. If it can happen to such a noble and morally sensitive woman as Electra, perhaps it can happen to all of us. Well, if you think about it, Electra has, in a way, always been prone to over-emotionality. That has been, if you will, her weakness. First, we saw it in the extremity of her grief, and now we see that over-emotionalism in the extremity of her exultation at revenge. Both reveal a dangerous loss of mental and moral balance that the Greeks so valued. But by the end of the play, the chorus, who had earlier urged her to consider that mental balance, they seem to have lost theirs as well. Now, we see Electra's violent loss of emotional control again when Aegisthus returns. She's been waiting outside the palace to deter him if he arrives while Orestes is murdering Clytemnestra. He comes shortly thereafter. And when Electra sees him approaching, she's thrilled that, quote, he's rushing headlong into justice's ambush. She can't wait. But first, she enjoys deceiving him into thinking that Orestes is in fact dead, telling Aegisthus that Orestes' corpse has been brought back and is currently lying inside the palace. He refers to the messenger finding his way into Clytemnestra's heart, implying that Clytemnestra is moved to joy by the report of Aegisthus' death. Of course, it's a very dark pun, because indeed that messenger, who is Orestes, found his way into Clytemnestra's heart by stabbing her there. Aegisthus will understand that only when he sees that the messenger has in fact punctured her heart and other parts of her body, when he sees that the corpse that is brought out is not Orestes, as he was expecting, but rather his wife's. As Electra cynically puts it, speaking to him, quote, what you'll see is not a pretty sight. No, indeed. Well, having been helpless for so long, Electra in this moment enjoys the power behind the trickery here. And she also enjoys the added shock and pain she knows her words are going to cause Aegisthus when he discovers the truth. He, after all, imagines that it's Orestes who is safely dead. No, when he sees that it is in fact his wife, he'll understand this double language that she's been using. She relishes that. When Orestes comes out of the palace, Aegisthus, like Clytemnestra, fails to recognize him and assumes that he is the messenger Electra has referred to. But when Orestes lifts the shroud to reveal the dead face of Clytemnestra that he's brought out with him, he says, don't you realize you've been exchanging words with a man who's dead? Again, we marvel here at Orestes' careful timing. Well, realizing that he has been tricked and that he is now trapped by a man he thought was dead, Aegisthus' tone changes from bullying to supplication. Like Clytemnestra, he begs for mercy. But consider Electra's reaction to that when he does. He says, I'm at your mercy. Please allow me a word, just one. Electra. No, Orestes, for God's sake, don't give him the chance to argue with you. When a man's been caught and is doomed to die, what can he gain by a moment's delay? Kill him at once. Kill him, and then throw out his corpse for the dogs and the birds to bury out of sight. No other payment. Wow. Now, you'll note that it is Electra, not Orestes, who is concerned at this moment with the urgency of timing. Kill him now before he has a chance to make any other appeal. But then she says, let's defile his body, not by ritual burial, but by throwing it out to the birds and the dogs to peck upon. Now, Orestes insists on killing Aegisthus, not on the spot, but rather wait a moment or two and go inside the palace where Aegisthus and Clytemnestra murdered Agamemnon years before. He does this, sort of countering Electra's urge that he kill Aegisthus right on the spot. He goes inside because that location for killing seems just and fitting. It was where the death he is avenging occurred. However, like Electra, he also wants his victim to suffer, and he enjoys this, as we see. Orestes tells Aegisthus, I'd rather you didn't enjoy your execution, but died in agony. All who presume to defy the law ought to be punished at once like this. Kill them. Crime would not be so rife if we did. Yes, I don't want you to enjoy being an ironic word. I don't want you to die without maximum pain. I want you to die in agony. And that's why I'm taking you inside. So Sophocles presents this then, at such moments, not just as an execution, but as a ruthless killing in which Orestes and Electra take unmistakable pleasure. As the play ends, both of them, along with the chorus, go into the palace where Aegisthus is about to be hacked to death. And Electra will now witness this killing. In fact, she's all too eager to witness it. Both her rapacious bloodlust and Orestes, at the play's end, are decidedly unpleasant. But the bloodlust is tragic in her case because, as I've suggested, her sensitive moral nature has clearly been corrupted, it seems, in the fulfillment of the long-delayed retribution that she desired. But maybe the most disturbing feature is that the play ends without any indication that Orestes or Electra will suffer guilt or punishment in the future for what they are doing here. Now, this is important because Sophocles' treatment of the story differs sharply here from those of Aeschylus and Euripides, both of whose works about this particular episode in the House of Atreus preceded Sophocles, and both of whose works probably the ancient Greek audience seeing this play would have already known. In the last part of Aeschylus' The Oresteia, Orestes is punished by the gods for killing his mother by being beset with the Furies, bird-like creatures who descend on him and shriek constantly around his head, enforcing his guilt to the point of madness. In Euripides' Electra, even though Electra urges Orestes to commit the killings even more insistently and helps plan them more than Sophocles' Electra does, even in that play, both brother and sister are tormented by guilt after the killings. But there is no evidence in Sophocles' Electra that this will ever happen. Brother and sister seem morally tainted by a kind of savage delirium, but not any remorse. Sophocles' Orestes never seems to have had any ethical scruples to begin with, but we know that Electra did, and it was a source of her inner conflict, her moral self-awareness, and ultimately it was the source of her tragic stature in the first part of the play. So for many readers, including me, the ultimate tragedy in Sophocles' Electra is really not the literal death we so often find, but rather a kind of figurative death, the death of Electra as a moral human being. One final question. You remember that Aristotle says that in Greek tragedy, the protagonist always suffers from a hamartia, that is to say, a mistake or error in judgment that may or may not arise from some weakness in his character. If we apply that model to Electra, what is her mistake? What is her misjudgment? And what inner flaw causes it? Well, I would suggest that her tragic mistake, her hamartia, is not so much the killings themselves as her behavior during them. In this hyper-emotionalism, we find that it causes her to lose her mental balance. She gives in to her dominant passion, over-emotionalism, be it grief or savage rage. She takes every emotion too far. Okay, that concludes what I have to say about Electra and brings us to Medea. Well, as we turn now to Euripides and Medea, a bit of background may be helpful. Euripides was the youngest of the three great Greek tragedians, and more of his plays survive than either Aeschylus or Sophocles, 18 plays as opposed, say, to just 7 by Sophocles. Euripides seems to have been the most controversial of the three playwrights. He won the prize at the City of Dionysia competition only 4 times during a very long life, many fewer than Aeschylus or Sophocles won, and Euripides left Athens 2 years before his death and went to the court of a king in far-off Macedonia to the north. Now, it's unclear why he won so infrequently or why he left, but some have suggested that both of these were signs or manifestations of the consequences of Euripides' famous irreverence. His tragedies are more bitter, more ironic, and even more morally problematic than Aeschylus's and Sophocles. The behavior of both his protagonists, like Medea, and the gods in his play shock us with their violence and self-interest. Now, this irreverence borders sometimes on cynicism, and it is one of the distinguishing features of Euripides' work. A second distinguishing feature, and I will be reiterating this, is the unparalleled psychological depth and complexity that he builds into his characters. And a third trait that sets Euripides apart from Aeschylus and Sophocles is his pronounced and deep fascination and sympathy for women. Most of Euripides' tragic protagonists are women, as reflected in the titles of his plays, many of them drawn from Homer's epics. These include plays such as Helen, Iphigenia at Aulis, and Electra, all of which treat the House of Atreus story. Other Euripides tragedies focus on entire groups of suffering females, such as the Trojan women, the supplicant women, the Phoenician women. Well, like his individual female protagonists, these groups of women often protest their powerless plight within Greek patriarchal culture, and some of them, Medea in particular, rebel against that patriarchy. Now, that kind of behavior and that sympathy for rebellious women was likely one source of controversy, and it almost undoubtedly unsettled Euripides' male audiences. No one protests more eloquently or rebels more shockingly in his plays than Medea does, and she's probably his single greatest and most vivid creation. Her denunciation of the subjugation of women would have registered, certainly, with a contemporary audience of Greek women in 431 BC, if only there had been such an audience there to see the play. But they weren't there, of course, and Medea herself, as we know, would have been played by a young man, just as Electra and Clytemnestra and all other female characters in Greek tragedy would have. Medea, nonetheless, still today has the power to disturb audiences as well as engage them. Why is that? Well, like Agamemnon and Electra, this is a revenge tragedy featuring an aggrieved woman who takes her rage to extremes. But to what extremes? To punish her husband Jason for leaving her to marry the princess Glauce, Medea schemes, poisons the princess and her father Creon, and kills her 2 young children born to Jason. She does all of these things to make him suffer, and she gets away with these slayings to a very large degree. She appears at the end of the play, above the skein in an airborne chariot, driven by dragons, with the boys' dead bodies draped over the sides. Now, she is not savagely joyful at this moment, like Sophocles' Electra, as we have seen, but neither is she punished by the gods for infanticide, as many viewers expect that she will be, and most think that she should be. After all, Clytemnestra's murder of Agamemnon, of her own blood, if you will, was something that the gods felt they needed to punish in most versions by sending or sanctioning Orestes' killing of her. And Orestes' killing of her had to be punished by the gods by afflicting him with the Furies, but in most versions. But not here. How do we feel then at the end of this play? There's no question that the play generates pity and fear in the audience, but many would say that the fear is the fear of Medea, rather than the Aristotelian fear that we could ever suffer a similar fate in her position. Yet, the curious thing is that Aristotle writes in the Poetics that, quote, Euripides is felt to be the most tragic of the great tragic poets, even though in many ways he seems to conform to Aristotle's model the least conveniently. Well, if Medea is tragic, it is surely a complex sense of tragedy that shatters our civilized conventions and challenges our ethical judgment, I think, even more than Sophocles' Electra does at the end of that play. Our judgment of Medea requires an understanding of what has occurred before the play begins, so it helps to know the full backstory. It all started with Jason's pursuit of the fabled Golden Fleece with a group of his countrymen from his home city of Iolcus. Their ship was called the Argo, and he and his men were called the Argonauts. The Golden Fleece is kept by one King Aeetes in the remote and rather backward northern kingdom of Colchis. Aeetes is Medea's father. And for Aeetes, the Golden Fleece is a cherished symbol of his power and authority. He knows that everyone else wants it. All other rulers jealously crave it because of the fleece's supernatural origins. The fleece was the skin of a golden flying ram that belonged to Zeus, the head of all the gods in the Greek pantheon. It possesses then this sense of a kind of divine power, potency. Now, Jason is actually ordered to get the fleece by his uncle Peleus, who usurped the throne in his home kingdom of Iaclus when he overthrew Jason's father. And hoping to get rid of Jason as a rival, Peleus tells him that he'll allow him to inherit the throne when he dies only if he brings back the golden fleece. And much to Peleus's shock, Jason does just that. But how? Well, Jason succeeds only because of Medea, who falls in love with him and helps Jason secretly behind her father's back. When Jason arrives in Colchis, King Aetes tells him that he can have the fleece only if he accomplishes 3 seemingly impossible tasks. He doesn't expect he's going to succeed any more than the man who sent him did. First, Jason must plow a field using fire-breathing bulls attached to the plow. Medea gives Jason an unguent to keep him from being burned alive, and he plows the field. Next, Aetes tells Jason that he must plant the plowed field with dragon's teeth, each of which will instantly rise up as an armed warrior ready to kill him. Well, Medea forewarns Jason of this and advises him so that Jason is able to play a clever trick. He tosses a rock, and the confused myrmidons, as they're called, all converge on it, crash into each other, and kill one another. Certainly, King Aetes never expected Jason to get this far, and he definitely doesn't want to part from the fleece. So finally he tells Jason that to acquire it, Jason must kill a sleepless dragon that guards the fleece. Now Medea is so smitten by Jason that she again betrays her father here by helping him. She uses her powers as a witch to make a potion that puts the beast to sleep, allowing Jason to slay the dragon and abscond with the fleece. Now, it's crucial to note that Medea helped Jason only after getting him to promise that he would marry her in a solemn vow in exchange if he succeeded. And he does marry her, and then, but only after sailing away with her from the kingdom of Colchis. Thereafter, Medea bears Jason 2 children. But she has not only fled her homeland, but she has, in the process of helping Jason, betrayed her father and finally killed her brother because the brother saw they were taking the fleece and tried to stop Jason as he was boarding his ship and sailing away with the prize. In short, then, Medea has given up everything for Jason and absorbed considerable guilt in the process. The crimes against her family haunt her at the start of the play, but she did it all for love. And Jason betrays that love. At the start of the play, Medea finds herself not part of a royal family in Jason's home city of Icolus, as she'd expected, for reasons we will soon learn, but rather she finds herself living in exile in the city of Corinth, where Jason has taken her and the children in his opportunistic attempt to marry King Creon's daughter Glauce. This means casting off Medea, of course, as his wife, if he is to marry the princess, which Jason has done just before the play opens. Medea then finds herself, at the start, a stranger in a strange land, aggrieved and furious because the man for whom she sacrificed everything has dumped her for a younger, better connected woman in his pursuit of wealth and political power. Well, the play opens with the nurse, who is a long-time retainer and friend of Medea's, expressing her regret and pity for Medea. She stands alone on stage. This woman, who seems familiar with her, a long-time retainer, a confidant from her own homeland. While Jason is living in the royal palace, the nurse stands in front of the small house where Medea lives and laments. Her lamentation fulfills a function that is usually in Greek drama assigned to the chorus, because it fills us in on past events. Here, the nurse has to do it rather than the chorus, because the chorus of Corinthian women, who will enter shortly hereafter, hardly know Medea at all and know nothing of her history. And so the play begins with the nurse's soliloquy alone. How I wish the Argo never had reached the land of Colchis, skimming through the blues, Symplegades, nor ever had fallen in the glades of Pelion, the smitten fir tree to furnish oars for the hands of heroes who in Peleus' name attempted the golden fleece. For then my mistress Medea would not have sailed for the towers of the land of Icolus, her heart on fire with passionate love for Jason, nor would she have persuaded the daughters of Peleus to kill their father and now be living here in Corinth with her husband and children. She gave pleasure to the people of her land of exile, and she herself helped Jason in every way. This is indeed the greatest salvation of all, for the wife not to stand apart from the husband. But now there's hatred everywhere. Love is diseased. For deserting his own children and my mistress, Jason has taken a royal wife to his bed, the daughter of the ruler of this land, Creon, and poor Medea is slighted and cries aloud on the vows they made to each other, the right hands clasped in eternal promise. She calls upon the gods to witness what sort of return Jason has made of her love. She lies without food and gives herself up to suffering, wasting every minute of the day in tears. So it has gone since she knew herself slighted by him, not stirring an eye, not moving her face from the ground, no more than either a rock or surging seawater. She listens when she is given friendly advice, except that sometimes she twists back her white neck and moans to herself, crying out on her father's name and her land and her home, betrayed when she came away with a man who now is determined to dishonor her. Poor creature. She has discovered by her sufferings what it means to one not to have lost one's own country. Well, the nurse expresses profound pity and regret for Medea in this soliloquy and stresses how much Jason owes Medea and how much he has therefore betrayed her. She not only helped him get the coveted fleece, but when they returned to Icolus, Medea, the nurse reports, persuaded the daughters of the reigning king Peleus to kill Peleus, thus enabling Jason to take the throne immediately. And she tells us that when she was the queen, Medea brought happiness and well-being to the people of Icolus, her adopted homeland. But the problem was, as it turns out, Jason was an inept ruler, and his ambitions and wanderlust led him to want more. Thus, he came to Corinth. Now, the nurse stresses Medea's, quote, passionate love for Jason, and it's clear that she will shed lots of blood in the name of that love, and that she will bear the guilt for that, because she has already shed a great deal of blood just getting him to marry her at all. Note that Medea confirms this deep sense of remorse she feels for the betrayals of her own family. Shortly after, she appears on stage and says, "Oh, my father, oh, my country, in what dishonor I left you, killing my own brother for it." Well, Medea is then, as we find her at the start, isolated, deeply depressed to the point where she is scarcely able to move, grief-stricken, and guilt-ridden. All of those things, but she is above all enraged. The nurse prepares us for this rage by stressing Jason's eternal vows to her, which he then broke so heartlessly. The nurse doesn't just pity Medea, though. It's not simply a matter of sympathy, because like the chorus in Electra, seeing her in her current state, she also fears for her sanity, fears for her life, fears that she may kill herself, but unlike the chorus in Electra, the nurse here also fears for the lives of others. In this soliloquy, the nurse's tone changes abruptly from pity to dread when she says that Medea has turned from her children and does not like to see them. I am afraid she may think of some dreadful thing, for her heart is violent. She will never put up with the treatment she is getting. I know and fear her, lest she may sharpen a sword and thrust to the heart, stealing into the palace where the bed is made, or even kill the king and the new-wedded groom, and thus bring a greater misfortune on herself. She's a strange woman. Now, note here that this sense of dread that she feels, goes in various directions. She may kill the princess, she may kill the king, she may kill Jason, and she also fears, the nurse does, she may even be capable of killing her own children. As she says, Medea is a strange woman. She's strange because, in part, unlike most women, including the women of the chorus, Medea refuses to accept the condition of female powerlessness and subjugation that females like Electra's sister Chrysothemis accept so readily. The old nurse predicts Medea's murder of the princess, but the most troubling detail in her opening monologue is that she mentions Medea is now refusing to look at her own children. Why might this be? She observes more than once that she's distressed by the fact that she simply won't turn her gaze upon them. It's as if she cannot stand to look at them at all. Well, the problem is that she cannot bear to look at her children because the children are, after all, part Jason's. And she sees Jason in them. She sees in them the image of their hated father. They are a reminder of Jason's betrayal. And indeed, Medea acknowledges this herself when she says, I have suffered. What should be wept for bitterly? I hate you, children of a hateful mother. I curse you and your father. Let the whole house crash. Well, note that the nurse sees Medea as fully capable of killing them, but not in such a way that she quite understands why she would do it. The nurse seems to fear that she would kill the children because she sees Jason in them and would simply strike out against them as the image of that tormenting husband she despises, a husband who in fact loves them. What she doesn't understand is that Medea will eventually kill the children, not in a fit of rage, but in a carefully planned gesture in order to maximize the greatest possible torment for Jason, precisely because he loves his children and because he still sees them, in fact, as his legacy. Well, the nurse then, not surprisingly, when she notices the way Medea looks at her children, wants to protect these two young boys by keeping them away from their mother's gaze. Thus, she says, "Go indoors, children. That would be the best thing. Don't bring them near their mother," she tells the tutor, particularly not in her angry mood. "Run quickly indoors," she tells them. "It's clear that Medea soon will be put lightning, and what cloud of her cries is rising, with a passion increasing. Oh, what will she do, proud-hearted and not to be checked in her course?" She's a force of nature, usually a violent force of nature. Now, we see the children come on stage with their tutor, another old retainer from Medea's homeland. And he brings with him a rumor of still more misery for Medea. It appears that she is to be driven out of Corinth, to be driven away from the city, away from Jason by order of King Creon. Creon is eager to do this because he's heard about Medea's violent conduct in the past, because he knows of her powers as a witch, and because he doesn't want to risk having her in his kingdom anywhere near his daughter. He also wants Jason to start a new line of succession with Glauce. So Creon is also sending Medea's children away with her to ensure that heirs to the throne will be heirs via his daughter. The tutor who speaks to the nurse here is more cynical than the nurse herself. While he too sympathizes with Medea and the way she has been betrayed, he is not surprised by Jason's behavior the way the nurse is. The tutor knows that this is the way men usually act. In fact, he tells the nurse, "Have you only just now discovered that everyone loves himself more than his neighbors? So Jason neglects his children for a new bride. That's the way of the world." Well, like Electra, we hear Medea before we see her. We hear her mournful cries off stage first. And when she does appear, the first thing Medea says is that she wishes she could die to escape her suffering, much as Electra had said something very similar. And especially after she had heard the news of Orestes' supposed death. But from the very beginning, Medea says she cannot bear to live. Oh, I wish that lightning from heaven would split my head open. Oh, what use have I now for life? I would find my release in death and leave this hateful existence behind me. Well, like the chorus in Electra, the old nurse tries to apply balm to her pain here by urging moderation, urging balance, urging self-control in this state of Medea's deep depression and violent anger. And she urges moderation both for Medea's sake and for the children's. As the nurse puts it, how can your children share in their father's wickedness? Why do you hate them so? Why do you look at them? Why can't you bear to look at them? She says, what is moderate, Medea, sounds best. Also in practice is best for everyone. Greatness brings no profit to people. Moderation, moderation. Curb your feelings. Now, you'll note, then, that this plea, not unexpectedly, falls on deaf ears, in much the same way that the chorus's plea for moderation in Electra does. But Medea doesn't even bother to listen. And unlike Electra, who knows that she should regain her balance, Medea has no tolerance for it. She embraces the very volatility of her feelings. Her indignation and rage and her drive for revenge are far more powerful than anything in her that could moderate those feelings, and they are also, as it proves to be, more powerful than her death wish. Well, Medea's first long speech to the chorus reveals the volatility of her temperament as she vacillates between the strong emotions that she is feeling, all of them extreme. Extreme sorrow, extreme remorse, and above all, extreme rage. The chorus of local women have heard about Medea, and they feel pity for her situation, and so they have come to see her. And they feel even greater pity when, standing outside her house on stage, they hear her moaning inside. But unlike Electra's chorus, these women scarcely know Medea. And when they hear her lamentations, nevertheless, they offer advice that they too hope will soothe her. Essentially, what they tell her is, assuming she can hear them, accept your plight as a woman because you cannot change it. Don't make yourself more miserable. Thus, they say, suppose your man gives honor to another woman's bed. It often happens. Don't be hurt. God will be your friend in this. You must not waste away. You're grieving too much. They haven't seen her yet, but they're speaking and hoping that she will hear them inside. Essentially, what they suggest is this. You're not alone, girl. Men often take other wives. Look at it this way, for your own mental survival. Your husband's not betraying you, but rather he's honoring another woman. In short, the chorus at this point is an apologist for the patriarchy that Medea is about to challenge and to punish in and through Jason. Now, Medea at this point, as I've noted, is still inside off stage. And if she hears this advice, surely she could only find demeaning and contemptible. But note, Medea, when she comes out, does not denounce the chorus as we might have expected. Because, as we'll see, from the beginning, she knows she needs them. Specifically, she can't offend them because she needs their silence about her plans. And to some extent, she needs their support for what she is about to do. But she also, in addition to their silence and in addition to their sympathy, wants from them, insofar as she can get it, a kind of active support because they are women. And in order to get that kind of active support, she has to change the chorus's view about gender roles and about the patriarchy under which they live. Thus, she offers them from the very start a remarkable protest, which is directed not just against Jason, but against the injustice of men in general. This is what she presents to them. She says, he, my own husband, Jason, has turned out wholly vile. Of all things which are living and can form a judgment, we women are the most unfortunate creatures. Firstly, with an excess of wealth is required for us to buy a husband and to take for our bodies. A master, for not to take one, is even worse. And now the question is serious whether we take a good or a bad one, for there is no easy escape for a woman in marriage, nor can she say no to her marriage. She arrives among new modes of behavior and manners and needs prophetic power unless she's learned it at home when she goes to her husband's house or kingdom. How best to manage him who shares the bed with her? And if we work out this well and carefully, and the husband lives with us and lightly bears his yoke, then our life is enviable. But if not, I'd rather die. And most often than not, women, she suggests, are badly treated in marriage. Now, this is an eloquent and compelling assault on gender equality in ancient Greece. Women are limited, Medea says, and victimized at every point in their lives. To marry, they have to bring money to the union and then submit to the mastery of their husbands. Nor can a woman refuse a marriage to a man who she doesn't love but wants to marry her. But even worse than marrying such a man is not securing a husband, because that leaves a woman then both powerless and alone as she grows older. Medea knows that the women in the chorus are familiar with these inequities. They live them each day, and she's playing on that familiarity, though they've certainly never heard someone like this talk about them before. Now, to some extent, aspects of her own situation are, of course, different. Medea persuaded Jason to marry her. Okay, she didn't wait for him to propose, though she did, in a sense, purchase him by helping him get the golden fleece, the way she says women must always purchase their husbands. But unlike most of the women in the chorus, she was motivated by passionate love, not by social custom or a need to marry out of material necessity, which she says is the plight of most Greek women. Now, Medea then goes on to complain about other injustices that she knows that the chorus has experienced, and that she too has experienced. She wants, in describing these, to awaken the chorus, to shake them out of their passive compliance. Men, she points out, are free to amuse themselves when they're bored with domestic life, while women are perpetually stuck at home. A man, when he's tired of the company in his home, goes out of the house and puts an end to his boredom and turns to a friend or a companion of his own age, but we're forced to keep our eyes on one alone. What they say of us is that we have a peaceful time, our husbands, living at home, they say, while they do the fighting in war. Ha! How wrong they are. I would very much rather stand 3 times in front of a battle than bear 1 child. Yet what applies to me does not apply to you. You at least have a country, but in every other way, you know what I'm talking about. Well, note that without knowing these women, Medea understands the situation, plays on what they share as victims in patriarchy, and in so doing builds a foundation with the chorus of female solidarity. Not just their silence, but now building their support. Having stressed what they share, though, Medea then cleverly ends her speech by noting how she is different, and in this respect, now building upon their outrage by adding their sense of pity for her. You have a country, your family is here, you enjoy life in the company of your friends at least, but I'm deserted, a refugee, thought nothing of by my husband, something he won in a foreign land. I have no mother or brother, no relation here with whom I can take refuge in this sea of woe. I'm all alone, except implicitly for you. Thus, we note here that everything Medea does and says, and the timing of everything she does, has a purpose, often a hidden purpose. And here, having appealed to the outrage these women ought to register, she now appeals to their pity in order to accomplish her goal. She gains the chorus's support enough so that she can now confide in them and get them to agree to remain silent when she discloses her rather ghastly plans to punish Jason, and even her support for much, but not all, of what she does. Without yet disclosing what her plan is, because she's still just beginning to formulate it, without ever disclosing that, she gets the women to support the general idea of violent revenge, as if by supporting it, these women will be gaining some kind of vicarious satisfaction for the mistreatment that they have suffered under patriarchy themselves. regaining that through what Medea herself will do. And she explains in this respect that the chorus says, "You are right, Medea, in paying back your husband. I'm not surprised at you for being sad." Yes. And Medea tells them, "In other ways, a woman is full of fear, defenseless, dreads the sight of cold steel. But once she's wronged in the matter of love, no other soul can hold so many thoughts of blood." And as soon as she mentions blood, yes, you're right, Medea, in paying back your husband. Okay. Well, this is a rather remarkable change in a group of women who first told Medea, just basically grit your teeth and bear it. Medea moves them so much that a little later they say, "You sailed away from your father's home with a heart on fire. You passed the double rocks of the sea, and now in a foreign country you have lost your rest in a widowed bed and are driven forth a refugee in dishonor from the land." Yes, okay. Now, as we see already in the way in which she plays the chorus, Medea has a special talent for knowing just where people are vulnerable, and she appeals to that weakness again and again in order to manipulate them. We see this on full display with Creon, who enters the stage to announce what we've already been told, that he is banishing Medea, and he tells her immediately why. This is, of course, the scene in the clip that I sent you from the 1983 Kennedy Center production. He tells her why, and he has very good reason, because he distrusts her, given her past, given her temperament, given her power as a witch, a craft, by the way, that she has learned from the witch goddess Hecate. Creon knows about this, and he doesn't mince words. "Medea, I ordered you to leave my territories in exile and take along with you your 2 children, and not to waste time doing it. It is my decree, and I will see it done. I'm afraid of you. Why should I dissemble it? Afraid that you may injure my daughter mortally. Many things accumulate to support my feeling. You're a clever woman, versed in evil arts. Yeah, you're a witch." Okay, now note that faced immediately with Creon's distrust and his firm resolve here to banish her, consider how Medea manipulates and tricks him. Her first ploy is to try to counter his suspicions. She says, "All my cleverness, it really isn't so much, Creon." "Well, then you're frightened, Creon. That I would harm you? There's no need. It is not my way to transgress the authority of a king. How you have injured me? You gave your daughter away to the man you wanted. Or certainly I hate my husband, but I think you've acted wisely. Nor do I grudge at you that your affairs go well now. May the marriage be a lucky one. Only let me live in this land, even though I've been wronged. I will not raise my voice, but I will submit to my betters." To which Creon immediately says, "No, no, no. That sounds gentle enough, but my heart will not be moved. I don't trust you. In fact, I trust you even less now than before. The thing is fixed. No manner, by no means shall you, an enemy of mine, stay in my country." He seems absolutely resolved. But one of the most amazing things about Medea is that she can change direction. Here, she does 3 things in her first appeal. First, she assures Creon that her reputation for dangerous cleverness is overblown. Then she tells him she has nothing personally against him or her daughter, only against Jason. And then she promises to submit quietly to his authority if only he'll let her stay. But, he's not a fool completely, because as we've seen, he rejects all of those arguments and reaffirms, as he puts it, "You're my enemy. You cannot stay in my country." But the flexibility that we see in Medea as a deceptive genius is remarkable here, because without missing a beat, when she hears again that she must leave, Medea embarks on a new strategy, one that manipulates Creon fatally, because it appeals to his 2 points of vulnerability, which she is so shrewd at spotting. First, his parental love, perhaps his overweening love for his daughter, and second, his vanity. Consider this extraordinary plea. Oh, allow me to remain here just for this day, so I may consider where to live in my exile, and I look for support for my children, since their father chooses to make no kind provision for them. Have pity on them. You have children of your own, Creon. It is natural for you to look kindly on them then. For myself, I do not mind if I go into exile. It's for the children's being in trouble that I mind. Now, you'll note that in the film clip I sent you, this is in a different translation, a rather longer statement as she bends before him on her knees. But note that Medea knows that she can avenge herself if she's allowed to stay in a single day. And that is all she asks for here. Just give me one day. And in order to gain that day, she appeals to Creon first as one who loves his daughter as a parent. And since they're both parents, surely he will understand how concerned she is for the fate of her own children, much as he would be for his daughter in similar circumstances. We're both loving parents, please. But note that it's not just an appeal to his parental devotion to Glacé, but she's also flattering Creon here, unmistakably, by begging him as the ruler for this small favor. Now, like Agamemnon, who pauses, you remember, before stepping onto the red carpet, Creon pauses too because he knows he's making a mistake here. Consider exactly his response. He says, "There is nothing tyrannical about my nature, and by showing mercy I've often been the loser. Even now I know that I'm making a mistake, and all the same you shall have your will. But I tell you this, that if the light of heaven tomorrow shall see you and your children in the confines of my land, then you will die. This word I've spoken is firmly fixed. But now if you will stay for this day alone, for if you can do no more of the things I fear." Okay. Now, note at this point that he has given in, even though he knows he should not. Why? Well, like Agamemnon, his weaknesses override his judgment here. He allows himself to imagine that he, as a loving parent, must naturally show compassion to the children of others. And he is flattered by the appeal on bended knee from Medea. But note that unlike Agamemnon, Creon is not the play's tragic hero. In both cases, what we see in this moment of indecision and then the wrong decision is a fatal error in judgment, a mistake, a classic hamartia. In Agamemnon's case, it fits for a tragic hero. But here, Creon is not the tragic hero. He's merely one victim in Medea's scheme, and an individual who deceives himself here under her influence, even though he knows he's making a mistake, and even though he says he's made similar mistakes in the past. Now, there is a twofold irony in this conversation as it resolves itself. Creon's loving thoughts about his daughter applied to Medea's children ultimately allow Medea to kill his daughter. And the second irony is that Medea kills her own children despite her alleged concern for their welfare here that moves Creon. Okay. Afterward, as you saw in Zoe Caldwell's performance in the clip I sent, afterward, when Creon leaves, Medea exults at exerting power over him. She's contemptuous of his weakness and his gullibility. She says, "Do you think I would have fawned on that man unless I had some end to gain?" She says this to the chorus. But she also exults not just at the power she exerted over this individual who she detests, but also exults at the prospect of revenge that his one-day dispensation is going to make possible. But how should she go about this revenge? Well, she addresses the chorus on this question. But as she addresses them, Medea is really debating it within herself. She says that he has given me this one day to stay here, and in this I will make dead bodies of the three of my enemies, the father, the girl, and my husband. I have many ways of death which I might suit them, and do not know, friends, which one to take in hand, whether to set fire underneath their bridal mansion, or sharpen a sword and thrust it to the heart, stealing into the palace where the bed is made. There is just one obstacle in this. If I'm caught breaking into the house and the scheming against it, I shall die, and give my enemies cause then for laughter. It is best then to go by the straight road. For her, the straight road is the deceptive road, the one in which I am most skilled, and make away with them by poison. So be it, then. Poison is her idea of the straight road. Now, several things to note here. First, at this point, Medea plans to kill Jason. Only later does she find a more agonizing way of punishing him, keeping him alive to see his dead children and his dead bride. Second, Medea has identified at this point 3 targets, but not yet how she will attack them. After rejecting a direct assault with a sword as impractical and horrified at the idea that if she fails they'll laugh at her, she decides instead on poison. And this is her sort of go-to method for 3 reasons. First, she's an expert at concocting it because she's a witch who knows all the dark arts. Second, sort of as the Russians have discovered, poison can be hidden and used very deceptively, as she will use it. And third, this kind of deception, using poison, is exactly the thing she suggests is the special province and talent of women. She says, "What is more, you were born a woman," she tells the chorus, "and women, though most helpless in doing good deeds, are of every evil the cleverest of contrivers." Yes, women can be sneaky. That is our way. Now, in such remarks, talking in gendered terms, we realize that Medea is attacking not just Jason and Creon, but is ultimately attacking patriarchy itself. Thus, Medea vows to use, quote, craft and silence to accomplish the murders in a way, she says, that befit women. And she adds that if her efforts fail and her own death becomes certain, before she goes to that death, quote, "I will then take a sword and attack my enemies." Now, this is notable, but the last notable thing here is that I want to point out is that in describing her plans and formulating to herself and the chorus, you'll note that Medea doesn't mention her children at this point. While she is not able to bear looking at them because they remind her of Jason, and while she is certainly capable of harming them, she isn't yet ready to sacrifice her sons in order to inflict unspeakable pain upon her husband. That's it.